The Staten Island Ferry glided through the dawn's fog, a ghostly vessel adrift in 1932 New York Harbor. Passengers huddled against the chill, their breaths mingling with the mist. On the upper deck, Eleanor Vance, heiress to a shipping fortune, lay motionless, her fur coat splayed like spilled ink. No blood, no wound, only the faint scent of almonds on her lips. Hercule Poirot, aboard by chance, studied the scene with piercing eyes. Cyanide, he deduced, meant murder. The fog thickened, cloaking secrets. Who among the passengers held the key to her death? The mystery beckoned, sharp as the ferry's horn. Chapter 1. The Fog of the Ferry. The Staten Island Ferry glided through the dawn's embrace, a ghostly silhouette against the slate-gray waters of New York Harbor. It was the autumn of 1932, and the city lay cloaked in a fog so dense it seemed to smother sound itself, save for the low, mournful wail of the ferry's horn. The air was sharp with salt and coal smoke, a reminder of the industrial pulse that throbbed beneath Manhattan's glittering facade. Passengers, bundled in wool coats and scarves, stood huddled on the lower decks, their faces half hidden, their murmurs swallowed by the mist. The upper deck, however, was eerily quiet, reserved for those who sought solitude or secrets. Hercule Poirot, the diminutive Belgian detective with a mustache as precise as his mind, stood at the railing, his gloved hands clasped behind his back. He had boarded the ferry on a whim, seeking a moment's respite from the clamor of the city. His visit to New York was meant to be a brief interlude, a chance to consult with a shipping magnate on a matter of fraud. But Poirot, ever attuned to the undercurrents of human behavior, sensed something amiss in the air. The fog, he mused, was not merely atmospheric. It was a veil, concealing truths that begged to be uncovered. His sharp eyes scanned the deck, noting the few souls brave enough to face the chill. A woman in a fur coat beside her, his gloved fingers gently lifting her wrist. No pulse. His nose twitched as he leaned closer, detecting a faint, bitter scent. Almonds. Unmistakable. Cyanide. His gray cells, as he called them, began to hum. This was no natural death. This was murder. The deckhand, barely 20, stood frozen, his eyes wide with panic. "She was fine a moment ago," he stammered. "I saw her drinking tea. Then she just fell." Poirot's gaze flicked to the boy's face, noting the sweat beading on his brow despite the cold. "Calm yourself, mon ami," Poirot said, his voice steady, accented with the precision of his Belgian roots. "Tell me, who is this woman?" "Miss Eleanor Vance," the boy replied, his voice barely a whisper. "The heiress. Everyone knows her." Poirot's mustache twitched. Eleanor Vance, heiress to the Vance Shipping Company, was a name even he, a stranger to these shores, recognized. Her father's empire dominated the harbors, and her wealth was the stuff of legend. But wealth, Poirot knew, often bred enemies. He rose, his eyes sweeping the deck. The fog had thickened, obscuring the other passengers, who now gathered at a cautious distance, their faces a blur of curiosity and fear. "Remain here," Poirot instructed the deckhand. "Touch nothing." He turned to the crowd, his voice cutting through the mist like a blade. Mesdames et messieurs, I am Hercule Poirot, detective. A crime has been committed. No one leaves this deck until I permit it. A murmur rippled through the onlookers, but none dared defy the authority in his tone. Poirot's attention returned to Eleanor. Her fur coat, a luxurious sable, was pristine save for a faint stain on the cuff. Tea, perhaps, or something more sinister. Her handbag, a delicate beaded affair, lay open beside her, revealing a silver cigarette case, a lace handkerchief, and an empty tailored overcoat. His cufflinks, glinting expensively, stood apart. His face pale, Dr. Julian Hart, Poirot recalled, a physician whose name had surfaced in a recent scandal. Beside him, a woman in a crimson hat clutched her pearls, her eyes darting nervously. Margaret Cole, a rival heiress whose feud with Eleanor was whispered in society pages. A third figure, a woman in a modest gray coat, wept silently. Clara Beaumont, Eleanor's closest friend, or so the gossip claimed. And Vincent Rousseau, the deckhand, lingered too close, his presence a shadow over the scene. Poirot's mind raced. Eleanor's death was no random act. The cyanide required planning, access, intent. But who among these passengers held the key? Dr. Hart, with his disgraced past, might harbor a grudge. Margaret Cole's envy was well known, her ambition a match for Eleanor's wealth. Clara Beaumont's tears seemed genuine, but Poirot knew the crocodile's tears often hid the sharpest teeth. And Vincent, the worker, carried the weight of resentment in his slumped shoulders. Each was a piece in the puzzle, but the picture remained obscured. The ferry's engines rumbled as it neared Manhattan, the skyline a faint shadow through the fog. Poirot knelt once more beside Eleanor, his fingers tracing the air above her coat, as if to conjure the truth from the mist. The shattered teacup caught his eye again. Its porcelain was fine, almost translucent, but a faint residue clung to the shards. A clue, perhaps, or a red herring planted to mislead. He straightened, his expression unreadable. "Monsieur Rousseau," Poirot said, turning to the deckhand. "Fetch the captain. This ferry is now a crime scene." The boy nodded and darted off, his footsteps echoing in the fog. Poirot addressed the crowd once more. "Mes amis, the truth is like this fog. It conceals, but it cannot hide forever. Hercule Poirot will find the one who did this." The passengers exchanged glances, some fearful, others defiant. Poirot's gaze lingered on each suspect, his gray cells weaving thick with the scent of damp wool and stale coffee. The hum of the ferry's engines a low pulse beneath the murmur of voices. Eleanor Vance's body had been covered with a tarpaulin and moved to a private cabin, but her presence lingered, a specter haunting the room. Poirot stood at the center, his diminutive frame radiating authority, his mustache a perfect arc of resolve. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice clear and accented, slicing through the tension like a scalpel. "A crime most foul has occurred. Mademoiselle Eleanor Vance is dead, poisoned by cyanide, and the murderer is among us." A gasp rippled through the crowd, but Poirot raised a gloved hand, silencing them. "I, Hercule Poirot, will uncover the truth. But first, I must know those who were closest to the scene. Step forward, s'il vous plaît, those who knew the victim or saw her final moments." 4 figures emerged from the throng, their movements hesitant, as if drawn by an invisible thread. Poirot's sharp eyes catalogued them. Dr. Julian Hart, a physician whose tailored overcoat could not mask his nervous fidgeting. Margaret Cole, an heiress whose crimson hat tilted defiantly. Clara Beaumont, Eleanor's friend, her gray coat damp with tears. And Vincent Russo, the deckhand, his oil-stained jacket a stark contrast to the other's finery. Each carried the weight of suspicion, and Poirot's gray cells began to weave their intricate dance. The lounge was a utilitarian space, its wooden benches scuffed from years of use, its walls adorned with faded maps of the harbor. A single overhead lamp cast harsh shadows, accentuating this strain on the suspects' faces. Poirot gestured to a table where a steward had placed Eleanor's belongings. The beaded handbag, the shattered teacup's remnants, and the empty vial, its almond scent now faint but unmistakable. He noted the passengers' reactions. Hart's eyes darted to the vial. Margaret's lips tightened. Clara's hands trembled, and Vincent's gaze fixed on the floor. Or a distraction. Poirot turned to Margaret Cole, whose pearls gleamed against her crimson hat like accusations. Mademoiselle Cole, your rivalry with Mademoiselle Vance is no secret. The society pages speak of your battle for a shipping contract, a prize worth killing for, no? Margaret's eyes narrowed, her voice sharp as cut glass. Eleanor and I were competitors, not enemies. I was in the lounge all morning, nowhere near her. A passenger, however, whispered to Poirot that Margaret had slipped out briefly, unnoticed by most. Her handbag, when inspected, revealed a silver cigarette case engraved with Eleanor's initials. A gift, Margaret snapped, but her composure wavered. Poirot's gray cells hummed. A gift or a theft? Clara Beaumont was next, her sobs subsiding into a delicate sniffle. Eleanor was my dearest friend, she said, her voice soft, almost fragile. I was below deck reading when it happened. Her gray coat was damp, not just from tears, Poirot noted, but from the fog. Had she been on the upper deck? Her alibi was thin, supported only by her own word, and her eyes avoided the vial on the table. Poirot pressed, gently. You saw nothing unusual, mademoiselle. No one near her. Clara shook her head, but her fingers clutched a lace handkerchief, its edges frayed. A sign of guilt, or merely grief? Vincent Russo stood apart, his broad shoulders hunched, his face a mask of sullen defiance. I was working, cleaning the deck, he muttered. Saw her with her tea, that's all. Poirot's gaze lingered on Vincent's hands, calloused and stained, the hands of a man who toiled while others prospered. You knew Mademoiselle Vance? Poirot asked. Vincent's eyes darkened. Knew of her. Her father fired me years ago, no reason given. But I didn't touch her. His tone was bitter, and Poirot noted a faint tremor in his jaw. A grudge, perhaps, nursed in silence. The lounge grew quieter, the passengers' whispers fading as Poirot paced, his polished shoes clicking rhythmically. He paused before the table. But when? And by whom? The crowd stirred as the ferry captain entered, a burly man with a weathered face. Mr. Poirot, the police are on their way, he said gruffly. We've sealed the deck. Poirot inclined his head. Bon, but the police, they will find only what I allow them to find. The truth. It is mine to uncover first. The captain frowned but said nothing, cowed by Poirot's quiet authority. Poirot's gaze returned to the suspects, each a puzzle piece in a mosaic of motive and opportunity. Dr. Hart's disgrace suggested a vendetta, his medical knowledge a means to procure poison. Margaret Cole's ambition burned brightly, her access to Eleanor's world a pathway to betrayal. Clara Beaumont's tears hid something, loyalty or a darker secret. And Vincent Russo, the worker scorned, carried the weight of resentment that could turn to violence. The vial, the thermos, the shattered cup, each was a clue, but also a potential red herring designed to mislead. He addressed the group again, his voice low but commanding. Mes amis, Mademoiselle Vance was not a woman to die by chance. Her wealth, her power, her secrets, they drew the killer's hand. I ask you now, what did you see? What did you hear? The lounge was silent, save for the creak of the ferry and the distant lap of waves. No one spoke, but their eyes betrayed them, fear, defiance, guilt. Poirot's mind raced, reconstructing the scene. Eleanor, alone on the deck, sipping tea from her thermos. The fog, cloaking all but the closest movements. The cyanide, swift and silent, requiring only a moment to administer. Had someone slipped it into her thermos before she boarded? Or had they tampered with her cup on the deck? The vial in her handbag suggested she carried her own doom, but Poirot doubted it. A woman like Eleanor Vance did not poison herself. Someone had placed it there, a clumsy attempt to deflect suspicion. Truth. The clues were here. The vial, the thermos, the cigarette case, the ledger Eleanor was rumored to carry. Each pointed to a different suspect, yet none formed a complete picture. As the captain signaled the police's arrival, Poirot raised a hand. One moment, mes amis. The ferry has docked, but the truth remains at sea. I will find it, and the one who killed Mademoiselle Vance will face justice. The suspects shifted, their eyes avoiding his. The foghorn wailed, a mournful cry that echoed the question burning in Poirot's mind. Who among them had woven this web of death? Chapter 3. The Heiress's Shadow. The fog over New York Harbor lingered as Hercule Poirot stepped off the Staten Island Ferry, his polished shoes clicking against the damp cobblestones of the Manhattan dock. The police had arrived, their heavy boots and gruff voices a stark contrast to the elegance of his own deductions. Eleanor Vance's body was now in their care, but Poirot knew the truth lay not in the morgue but in the lives she had touched. The heiress's death, marked by the bitter scent of cyanide, was no mere tragedy. It was a calculated act, and the clues were scattered like leaves in the autumn wind. Poirot's gray cells, those marvelous instruments of logic, thrummed with purpose as he set out to unravel the shadow cast by Eleanor's life. He made his way to the Vance family penthouse, a towering edifice of Art Deco splendor overlooking Central Park. The doorman, a stoic figure in a braided uniform, recognized Poirot's name and ushered him inside with a deferential nod. The elevator hummed upward, its mirrored walls reflecting Poirot's meticulous silhouette, his tailored coat, his perfectly tilted hat, his mustache a study in symmetry. He was not here to mourn but to investigate, and the penthouse, he suspected, held secrets as grand as its marble floors. The maid, a nervous girl named Betsy, admitted him to Eleanor's private study. The room was a shrine to wealth. Mahogany shelves lined with leather-bound books, a crystal chandelier coated with gloved hands, his fingers tracing the elegant script. The entries were cryptic, filled with abbreviations and coded phrases. One caught his eye. The truth lies in the ledger. CB knows more than she admits. CB, Clara Beaumont, perhaps? Poirot's mustache twitched. A clue or a deliberate misdirection? He turned to Betsy again. Did Mademoiselle Vance receive visitors recently? Anyone unusual? The maid hesitated, then nodded. Dr. Hart came 2 nights ago. They argued, sir. I heard raised voices, something about debts unpaid. Miss Eleanor sent him away. Poirot's gray cells seized on this. Dr. Julian Hart, disgraced by Cornelius Vance's accusations, had a motive rooted in vengeance. Had he sought to settle old scores with the daughter? Poirot's search of the study yielded another find. A torn photograph tucked inside the diary. It showed Eleanor and Clara Beaumont at a society gala. Their smiles strained, their eyes avoiding each other. The tear bisected Clara's face, as if Eleanor had meant to erase her. Poirot slipped the photograph into his pocket, its jagged edge a silent accusation. Clara's tears on the ferry had seemed genuine, but Poirot knew the heart could deceive as deftly as the mind. What had strained their friendship? A betrayal, perhaps, or a secret too dangerous to share. Leaving the penthouse, Poirot ventured to the docks, where the Vance Shipping Company's offices stood, a fortress of brick and ambition. The manager, a wiry man named Mr. Grayson, greeted him with guarded courtesy. Miss Vance was brilliant, Grayson said, his voice tinged with admiration. She controlled every detail of the business, even after her father's death. But she had enemies, competitors, disgruntled workers, even family. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Family, monsieur? Who? Grayson hesitated. Her brother, Edward. He resented her control. And others whispered of her ruthlessness. She was no saint. Poirot reasoned, was the key. Its use required knowledge, access, and intent. Dr. Hart, with his medical background, could procure it easily. Clara, with her photography hobby, might have access to chemicals. Margaret's wealth opened doors to any poison, and Vincent's connections among the dock's underbelly could not be dismissed. But the thermos, Eleanor's silver thermos, nagged at Poirot's mind. It was personal, distinctive, a vessel she trusted. Had someone tampered with it before she boarded, or during her solitary moment on the deck? Poirot returned to the ferry, now under police guard, to examine the scene again. The upper deck was deserted, the fog lifting to reveal a city skyline etched in gray. The bench where Eleanor had died bore faint marks, a scratch, a smudge of oil. Poirot knelt, his magnifying glass glinting as he studied the oil. It matched the stains on Vincent Rousseau's jacket. But such stains were common among ferry workers. A red herring, perhaps, or a careless mistake by the killer? He recalled the steward's words. Eleanor had brought her own thermos. Poirot requested it from the police, who had secured it as evidence. The silver flask was ornate, engraved with the Vance crest, but its cap was loose, as if recently opened. A faint residue clung to the rim. Cyanide, Poirot suspected, though the police would confirm it. Had someone slipped the poison into the thermos before Eleanor boarded? Or had they approached her on the deck, unseen in the fog? Poirot's thoughts turned to the ledger mentioned in Eleanor's diary. Grayson had mentioned it too. A record of the company's dealings, kept by Eleanor with obsessive care. If it held the truth she referenced, it could point to the killer. But the ledger was not in the penthouse, nor among her belongings on the ferry. Had she hidden it, or had the killer taken it to conceal their motive? The suspects' faces flashed through Poirot's mind. Hart's nervous hands, Margaret's defiant glare, Clara's trembling lips, Vincent's sullen scowl, silent witness. Eleanor Vance had been a woman of power, her life a tapestry of ambition and secrets. The ledger, the photograph, the thermos, the vial. Each was a thread, but the pattern remained elusive. Poirot adjusted his hat, his resolve unshaken. The heiress's shadow stretched long, touching each suspect, but one had stepped into darkness to end her life. As he walked back to his hotel, the city's pulse surrounded him, horns blaring, voices shouting, the rhythm of a world unaware of the drama on its waters. Poirot's mind was a storm of deductions, each clue a spark in the fog. The ledger held the key, he was certain, but where was it? And what truth had Eleanor uncovered that cost her life? The question hung heavy, a cliffhanger in the mist. What secret had driven the killer to poison her tea? Chapter 4. The Doctor's Disgrace. The late afternoon sun struggled through the thinning fog, casting a pale glow over Manhattan's bustling streets as Hercule Poirot made his way to a dockside cafe. Its windows steamed from the warmth within. The scent of coffee and fried dough mingled with the briny air of the harbor, a fitting stage for his next inquiry. Dr. Julian Hart, the disgraced physician, was a man whose past clung to him like damp wool, and Poirot's gray cells were alight with the need to unravel his connection to Eleanor Vance's murder. The cyanide, the thermos, the empty vial, each pointed to a killer with knowledge and opportunity, and Hart, with his medical expertise, stood squarely in the frame. The cafe, a modest establishment frequented by dock workers and clerks, was crowded with the clatter of cups and the murmur of conversation. Poirot spotted Hart at a corner table, his tailored overcoat draped over a chair, his hands fidgeting with a silver cigarette lighter. The doctor's face was drawn, his eyes shadowed by sleeplessness or guilt. Poirot approached with his characteristic precision, his polished shoes silent on the practice. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And Mademoiselle Eleanor? Did she share her father's view? Hart hesitated, his fingers tightening around the lighter. She sought me out 2 nights ago at her penthouse. Said she wanted my help, something about her father's business. I refused. I wanted nothing to do with the Vances. Poirot leaned forward, his gaze piercing. And yet, you were on the ferry, near her bench before dawn. A curious coincidence, non? Hart's face paled. I was restless, couldn't sleep. I took the early ferry to clear my head. I saw her, but we didn't speak. Poirot's gray cells hummed. Hart's story was plausible, but the maid's account of an argument suggested more. He pressed further. You are a man of medicine, monsieur. Cyanide is a poison not easily obtained, yet within your reach, perhaps. Hart's eyes widened, his voice rising. I had no poison. I'm a doctor, not a murderer. But his hands trembled, betraying his composure. Poirot noted a faint stain on Hart's cuff. Ink, perhaps, or something more incriminating. The cafe's noise faded as Poirot requested Hart's medical bag, which the doctor reluctantly produced. Inside, among vials of laudanum and bandages, was a syringe, its barrel empty but faintly scented with a chemical tang. Poirot's nose twitched. Cyanide, or a clever imitation? "This syringe, monsieur," he said, holding it aloft. "It is most curious. What was its purpose?" Hart stammered. "It's for emergencies. I carry it always." Poirot's mustache twitched. A syringe was a precise tool, perfect for administering poison. But was it too obvious? A red herring planted to mislead? Leaving the cafe, Poirot sought corroboration. A ferry passenger, a bespectacled clerk named Mr. Thompson, had approached the police with a statement. Poirot met him at the dock, where the ferry loomed like a silent witness. "I saw Dr. Hart," Thompson said, adjusting his glasses. He was silver thermos, engraved with the Vance crest, was his focus. The police had confirmed traces of cyanide in its residue, but the thermos was sealed when found, suggesting the poison was added before Eleanor boarded. Hart, with his medical knowledge, could have accessed her penthouse, tampered with the thermos during their meeting. But why leave the vial in her handbag? A clumsy mistake or a deliberate frame? Poirot's thoughts turned to the other suspects. Margaret Cole's rivalry suggested a motive, but her access to Eleanor's thermos was less clear. Clara Beaumont, with her cryptic letter from Eleanor, might have slipped poison into the tea during a moment of trust. Vincent Russo, the deckhand, had opportunity on the deck, but his resentment seemed too raw, too unrefined for such a precise crime. Hart, however, had both motive and means, his disgrace a wound that festered. At a nearby apothecary, Poirot inquired about cyanide purchases. The chemist, an elderly man with a ledger of his own, shook his head. "Haven't sold cyanide in months. It's tightly controlled, especially since the prohibition on certain chemicals." But he paused, adding, "A doctor, though, could get it through medical channels. Or someone with connections." Poirot's mind raced. Hart's connections, or perhaps Clara's photography supplies, could provide the poison. The net was tightening, but the truth remained slippery. Back at the dock, Poirot interviewed a ferry worker who had seen Hart the night before Eleanor's death. "He was pacing near the crew quarters," the worker said. "Looked agitated, kept checking his watch." Poirot noted the detail. Hart's restlessness suggested planning, or perhaps fear of discovery. The worker added, "He asked about Miss Vance's habits when she took the ferry. Said he needed to speak with her." Poirot's gray cells whirred. Had Hart been plotting or seeking reconciliation? The syringe nagged at Poirot. He requested a police chemist to analyze it, suspecting it held saline, a decoy to deflect the deck, a shadow over the crime. But was he the mastermind, or a pawn in a larger game? The other suspects, Margaret, Clara, Vincent, hovered in his thoughts, their motives intertwined with Eleanor's secrets. The thermos, the vial, the ledger. Each was a thread, but the tapestry remained unfinished. Poirot adjusted his scarf, his resolve unshaken. The doctor's disgrace was a wound that bled suspicion, but the truth required more than motive. The cyanide's path, the thermos's tampering, the vial's placement, all pointed to a killer who planned meticulously, kept faltered in execution. As he walked into the gathering night, Poirot's gray cells burned with a single question, sharp as the harbor's wind. Had Hart's syringe delivered death? Or was it a false note in the symphony of murder? Chapter 5. The Rival's Envy. The twilight streets of Manhattan shimmered with the glow of gaslights and electric signs, their radiance muted by the lingering fog that clung to the city like a whispered secret. Hercule Poirot, his coat buttoned against the evening chill, navigated the bustling sidewalks toward a speakeasy tucked in the shadow of the Flatiron Building. The air carried the tang of illicit whiskey and the murmur of jazz, a fitting backdrop for his pursuit of Margaret Cole, the heiress whose rivalry with Eleanor Vance had burned brightly in the gossip columns. Her crimson hat, her engraved cigarette case, her flimsy alibi, all pointed to a woman whose envy might have turned deadly. Poirot's gray cells, ever restless, sought to peel back the layers of her polished facade. The speakeasy, known as the Gilded Lily, was a den of velvet curtains and low laughter, its patrons cloaked in the decadence of 1932. Poirot's impeccable attire drew curious glances as he entered, his mustache a beacon of precision amid the haze of cigarette smoke. Margaret Cole sat at a corner booth, her crimson hat tilted rakishly, a martini glass cradled in her gloved hand. Her eyes, sharp as cut emeralds, met Poirot's with a flicker of defiance. "Mr. Poirot," she said, her voice smooth but edged, "to what do I owe this intrusion?" Poirot settled opposite her, his movements deliberate. "Mademoiselle Cole," he began, his Belgian accent lending a musical cadence to his words. "The death of Mademoiselle Vance is a puzzle, and you, I fear, are a piece most intriguing. Your rivalry, it was no secret. Tell me, what drove you to compete so fiercely?" Margaret's lips curved, but the smile did not reach her eyes. "Business, Mr. Poirot. Eleanor and I both sought a shipping contract with the Atlantic Line. She won. I lost. That's all." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "And yet, mademoiselle, you were absent from your charity gala during the hour of her death." A waiter Tommy lit a cigarette and spoke in hushed tones. "Miss Cole left around midnight," he said. "Said she had a headache, but I saw her hail a cab toward the docks. Didn't come back till after 1. Poirot's mind raced. The ferry's early run, when Eleanor died, was at 4 a.m., but a midnight trip to the docks suggested planning. Or reconnaissance. Poirot's next stop was the Vance Shipping Company's offices, where he examined records of the Atlantic Line contract. Mr. Grayson, the manager, produced a file with reluctance. "Miss Cole tried everything to win that contract," he said. "Offered lower rates, spread rumors about our reliability. Miss Eleanor fought back, used her charm and her father's name. She won, but it cost Margaret dearly. Her investors pulled out." Poirot's gray cells hummed. Financial ruin was a motive as old as time, and Margaret's pride was a spark that could ignite murder. Among the papers, Poirot found a forged document, a letter purporting to be from Eleanor, promising exclusive rates to a rival firm. The handwriting was a close match, but the ink was fresh, the paper too crisp. "This letter," Poirot said, holding it up. "It is a fabrication, oui? Did Mademoiselle Cole have access to such documents?" Grayson hesitated. "She visited often, before the feud. Could have seen Eleanor's signature, copied it. The forgery pointed to Margaret, a desperate attempt to undermine Eleanor's empire. But was it a prelude to murder? Poirot returned to the ferry, now silent under police watch, to re-examine Eleanor's belongings. The silver cigarette case in Margaret's possession nagged at him. He requested it from the police who had catalogued it as evidence. The engraving, EV, was unmistakable, but the case's interior held a faint residue, not tobacco, but something chemical. Poirot's nose twitched. Cyanide, perhaps, or a clever imitation. Had Margaret used the case to smuggle the poison, then claimed it as a gift to deflect suspicion? At a society club where Margaret was a member, Poirot questioned cells seized on this. Had Margaret's plan begun then? To test this, Poirot visited a chemist near Margaret's residence, inquiring about cyanide. The chemist, a meticulous man with wire-rimmed glasses, checked his records. "No sales to Miss Cole," he said. "But a woman matching her description bought photographic chemicals last month. Could include cyanide if you know how to use it." Poirot's mind raced. Margaret, with her wealth and connections, could have acquired the poison discreetly, perhaps under a false name. Back at the dock, Poirot interviewed a ferry worker who had seen Margaret the night before Eleanor's death. "She was here," the worker said, "near the ticket booth, late. Looked like she was waiting for someone." Poirot's gray cells whirred. Had Margaret been scoping the ferry, planning her move? The timing aligned with Tommy's account of her midnight cab ride. But a witness, an elderly passenger, swore Margaret was at the gala until dawn, her crimson hat unmistakable. A contradiction or a clever alibi? The vial in Eleanor's handbag remained a puzzle. If Margaret was the killer, why leave it there? To frame Eleanor as suicidal, or to implicate another? Poirot's logic suggested a calculated mind, but the vial's presence was sloppy, a mistake Margaret's pride would not allow. Or was it a red herring, designed to mislead? The cigarette case, the forged letter, the absent alibi, each pointed to Margaret. But the picture was incomplete. As night fell, Poirot stood by the ferry, the harbor's lights reflecting on the water like scattered clues. Margaret Cole's envy was a fire that burned brightly, her motive clear, her opportunity plausible. But the thermos required access, the cyanide required knowledge, and the vial suggested a second hand. Had Margaret acted alone, or was she part of a larger scheme? The ledger, still missing, loomed in Poirot's mind. Its secrets, Eleanor had written, held the truth. He recalled the diary's cryptic note. "CB knows more than she admits." Clara Beaumont, Margaret's rival in Eleanor's affections, might hold the key. Had Margaret discovered a secret Clara shared with Poirot stood on the Staten Island Ferry dock, his gloved hands clasped behind his back, his eyes fixed on the vessel that had borne Eleanor Vance's final moments. The ferry, now a silent witness to murder, loomed against the rising sun, its hull streaked with salt and secrets. Vincent Rousseau, the deckhand whose calloused hands and sullen demeanor marked him as a man of toil and resentment, was Poirot's focus today. The workers' grudge against the Vance family, born of an unjust dismissal, simmered like a coal fire, and Poirot's gray cells were alight with the need to probe its depths. Vincent Rousseau was not hard to find. Poirot descended into the ferry's engine room, where the air was thick with the scent of oil and metal, the rhythmic thud of machinery a counterpoint to the harbor's lapping waves. Vincent stood at a workbench, his broad shoulders hunched over a tangle of ropes, his oil-stained jacket a testament to his labor. His face, weathered by years of wind and work, turned wary as Poirot approached. "Mr. Poirot," he said, his voice gruff. "I got nothing more to say. I was cleaning the deck when Miss Vance died. That's it." Poirot's mustache twitched, his gaze steady. "Monsieur Rousseau, the truth, it is like the oil on your hands. It clings, even when you wish it gone. You knew Mademoiselle Vance's family, oui? Her father, Cornelius, dismissed you unjustly. Tell me, what weight does such a grudge carry?" Vincent's jaw tightened, his hands pausing mid-task. "It was years ago," he muttered. "Cornelius Vance fired me for speaking up about unsafe conditions. Left me with nothing. But I didn't kill his daughter." Poirot's gray cells hummed. Resentment, nursed over years, could fester into violence. But Vincent's denial had a raw edge, a sincerity that warranted scrutiny. "You were on the deck, monsieur, near Mademoiselle Vance's bench. A worker saw you tampering with supplies the night before. What were you doing?" Vincent Malone, who worked the same shift. In the engine room's din, Malone leaned close, his voice low. "Rousseau's a good man, but he hated the Vances. Said Cornelius ruined his life, and Eleanor was no better, strutting around like she owned the harbor. I saw him near the upper deck that night, fiddling with something. Didn't look like cleaning to me." Poirot's gray cells seized on this, Vincent's presence, his opportunity, his motive. But cyanide required precision, not just anger. Was Vincent capable of such a calculated act? At a dockside tavern, Poirot gathered more whispers about Vincent's past. A bartender wiping down the counter recalled Vincent's rants against the Vance family. "He'd drink and curse Cornelius," the man said. "Said he'd make them pay one day. When Eleanor took over, he tried getting his job back. She laughed him off." The words painted a picture of a man whose pride had been crushed, his grudge a smoldering ember. But the bartender added, "Vincent's no chemist. Poison? That's fancy work, not his style." Poirot returned to the ferry, his mind tracing the path of the cyanide. The silver thermos, Eleanor's personal flask, was the key. Vincent, as a deckhand, had access to the deck, but not necessarily to Eleanor's penthouse, where the thermos might have been tampered with. Yet his presence the night before suggested opportunity. Had he slipped the poison into the thermos during his maintenance? The vial in Eleanor's handbag, however, complicated the picture. Why leave it there, unless to frame her, or another? Poirot examined the deck again, the bench where Eleanor had died now cordoned off by police tape. The faint oil smudge he'd noted earlier matched Vincent's jacket, but such stains were common among ferry workers. A red herring, perhaps, or a careless mistake. He recalled the thermos, its cap loose, its residue laced with cyanide. Vincent's maintenance log placed him on the deck, but no witness saw him near Eleanor's bag. The vial's presence suggested a more sophisticated mind, one that planned, or maybe industrial. Poirot's thoughts turned to the other suspects. Dr. Hart's medical access, Clara's photography supplies, Margaret's wealth, all were more likely sources. Vincent's grudge was clear, but his means were less so. Back at the ferry, Poirot questioned a steward who had worked the early run. "Rousseau was on deck before dawn," the steward said. "Looked jumpy, kept checking his watch, but he didn't go near Miss Vance's bench, far as I saw." The steward's account conflicted with Malone's, casting doubt on Vincent's actions. Poirot's logic wrestled with the contradiction. Was Vincent's presence routine or a prelude to murder? The ledger still missing loomed in Poirot's mind. Eleanor's diary had hinted at its importance. The truth lies in the ledger. If Vincent was involved, the ledger might expose a financial slight, a reason for his dismissal that Eleanor had uncovered. But without it, Poirot's deductions were incomplete. He recalled the torn photograph, the forged letter, the cigarette case. Each clue pointed to a different suspect, yet Vincent's raw anger stood apart, a motive unrefined by cunning. As noon approached, Poirot stood by the ferry, the harbor's gulls crying overhead. Vincent Rousseau's grudge was a wound that bled suspicion, his presence on the deck a shadow over the crime. But the cyanide required knowledge, the thermos required access, and the vials suggested a second hand. Had Vincent acted alone, or was he a pawn in a larger scheme? The oil smudge, the maintenance log, the letter from Cornelius, all wove a narrative of resentment, but the truth remained elusive. Poirot adjusted his scarf, the city's rhythm a backdrop to his thoughts. Vincent's anger was a fire, but was it hot enough to burn through Eleanor's defenses? The thermos, the vial, the ledger, each was a piece of the puzzle, but the final shape danced just beyond his grasp. As he walked toward his next lead, the ferry's horn wailed, a mournful echo of the question burning in his mind. Had Vincent's grudge forged a path to murder, or was he merely a shadow in the fog? Chapter 7. The friends seek narrow tenement, its brick facade weathered by years of soot and neglect. The landlady, Mrs. O'Connell, a stout woman with a suspicious squint, let Poirot in after a brief exchange, her keys jangling like a warning. "Miss Beaumont's not herself," she said, her voice low. "Been locking her door, jumping at shadows. Something's eating her." Poirot nodded, his mustache a perfect arc of contemplation. He climbed the creaking stairs, the air heavy with the scent of cabbage and coal, and knocked on Clara's door. Clara opened it, her face pale, her eyes red-rimmed from crying or sleeplessness. "Mr. Poirot," she said, her voice soft as a sigh. I didn't expect you." She wore a simple dress, her gray coat draped over a chair, its damp hem a silent clue. Poirot stepped inside, his gaze sweeping the small room. Sparse furniture, a single window overlooking an alley, a table cluttered with photography supplies. "Mademoiselle Beaumont," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "The death of Mademoiselle Vance weighs heavily on you. I must know what secret you shared with her. The truth. It cannot hide forever." Clara's hands trembled as she gestured to a chair. "Eleanor was my dearest friend," she said, her voice breaking. "We met at a charity event years ago. She was so alive, so kind. But lately she was different, distant. She said she'd found something troubling but wouldn't tell me what." Poirot's gray cells seized on this, recalling Eleanor's diary. "The truth lies in the ledger. CB knows more than she admits." He leaned forward. "And the letter, mademoiselle? The one that said, 'Forgive me, but I know.'" What did Eleanor know? Clara's eyes widened, her fingers clutching a lace handkerchief. "You found it," she whispered. I didn't want anyone to see." She rose, retrieving a hidden drawer beneath her desk, its false bottom concealing a bundle of letters. She handed Poirot one, its paper gently. "A neighbor saw you at the docks late that night. What were you doing?" Clara's face crumpled. I wanted to talk to Eleanor, to beg her to stay quiet. but I didn't find her. I went home. Poirot's gaze drifted to the photography supplies on the table. A camera, developing trays, bottles of chemicals. One bottle caught his eye, its label faded but legible. Potassium cyanide, used for developing prints. "Mademoiselle," he said, holding it up. "This is a dangerous substance, no? And yet you claim it is for your photography?" Clara's voice trembled. "It's common in the darkroom. I've never used it for anything else, I swear." But her eyes avoided his, and Poirot noted the receipt tucked beneath the bottle, dated a week prior. A coincidence or a clue? Leaving Clara's apartment, Poirot sought confirmation at a nearby chemist's shop. The chemist, a bespectacled man with meticulous records, confirmed the sale. "Miss Beaumont bought cyanide for her photography," he said. "She's a regular, knows her chemicals." Poirot's gray cells hummed. Cyanide was indeed used in photography, but its presence in Clara's possession was damning given the method of Eleanor's death. Had Clara slipped the poison into Eleanor's thermos, driven by fear of exposure? At the ferry dock, Poirot questioned a ticket clerk who worked the midnight shift. "Saw a woman in a gray coat," the clerk said, scratching his chin. "Boarded late, looked nervous, didn't stay long." The description matched Clara, her midnight visit aligning with Mrs. O'Connell's account. Had she sought Eleanor to plead her case, or to ensure her silence? The thermos, Poirot reasoned, was the key. Clara, as Eleanor's friend, knew her habits, her preference for her silver thermos, her solitary moments on the deck. Access was no issue, but intent was another matter. Poirot returned to the Vance penthouse, seeking more on Edward Vance. The maid, Betsy, was reluctant but forthcoming. "Mr. Edward's a recluse," she said. "Follow murder." At a cafe near the dock, Poirot overheard dock workers discussing Clara. "She was always trailing after Miss Vance," one said, "like a puppy, till they fell out. Heard Eleanor caught her in some scandal." The gossip aligned with the letter, painting Clara as desperate, her loyalty strained by betrayal. Poirot's gray cells wrestled with the timeline. Clara's midnight visit, her cyanide purchase, her thin alibi. Each was a thread, but the tapestry was incomplete. He sought out a photography expert, a professor at a nearby college, to verify Clara's claim. "Cyanide's used in wet plate photography," the professor said, "but it's rare now, with safer alternatives. Miss Beaumont would know how to handle it." The confirmation was double-edged. Clara's expertise made her a plausible suspect, but her explanation held water. Poirot's logic demanded more, a direct link to the thermos, a witness to her actions. As evening fell, Poirot stood by the ferry, the harbor's lights twinkling like clues in the dark. Clara Beaumont's secret, her affair with Edward, was a motive wrapped in shame. Her access to cyanide a means to silence Eleanor. But the vial, the thermos, the ledger, all suggested a broader conspiracy. Had Clara acted alone, driven by fear, or was she a pawn in a larger game? The torn photograph, the forged letter, the cigarette case, each pointed elsewhere. Yet Clara's tears held a truth Poirot could not yet grasp. He adjusted his hat, the city's rhythm a counterpoint to his thoughts. Clara's secret was a wound, her loyalty a mask that might conceal murder. The cyanide's path, the thermos's tampering, the vial's placement, All required a delicate hand, and Clara's hands, trembling though they were capable. As he walked into the night, the ferry's horn wailed, a mournful echo of the question burning in his mind. Had Clara's betrayal poured death into Eleanor's cup? Or was her secret merely a shadow? But Betsy, under Poirot's gentle insistence, provided the combination, whispered to her by Eleanor in confidence. Miss Eleanor said it was her insurance, Betsy murmured, twisting her apron. The safe clicked open, revealing a leather-bound ledger, its pages thick with meticulous entries. Poirot's mustache twitched as he lifted it, his gloved fingers tracing the embossed cover. Here at last was the key to Eleanor's death, or a trap set by her killer. He settled at the desk, the ledger open before him, its columns a labyrinth of figures and initials. Eleanor's handwriting was precise, her notes detailing shipments, contracts, and payments for the Vance Shipping Company. But beneath the routine transactions, Poirot found anomalies, sums siphoned to anonymous accounts, marked with initials JH, MC, CB, EV. Dr. Julian Hart, Margaret Cole, Clara Beaumont, and Eleanor herself. Embezzlement, Poirot deduced, on a scale that could ruin the company. Eleanor had uncovered it, her diary's words now clear. She knew a truth that threatened someone's ruin. Poirot's gray cells raced. The ledger pointed to all three suspects, their initials a damning chorus. Had Hart, disgraced by Cornelius, sought to reclaim his losses through theft? Had Margaret, driven by envy, siphoned funds to undermine her rival? Or had Clara, desperate to protect her scandalous affair, betrayed Eleanor's trust? The ledger offered motives, but no killer, its secrets a maze without an exit. Poirot's eyes narrowed as he noted a final entry. Meeting on ferry, 4 a.m. Must confront them. Them, Puller. Had Eleanor faced her killer alone, or was more than one hand involved? Leaving the penthouse, Poirot ventured to the docks, where the ferry lay under police watch, its silhouette a ghost in the harbor's glow. He sought a passenger who had witnessed the fatal morning, a retired sailor named Mr. Callahan, whose keen eyes had caught a detail overlooked. In a smoky tavern, Callahan leaned close, his voice rough as the sea. Saw a man in a hooded coat near Miss Vance's bench. He said Clara's intimacy with Eleanor. All provided opportunities to tamper with the thermos. Vincent's deck duties offered proximity, but his lack of chemical knowledge weakened his case. The ledger, however, implicated them all, its entries a web of greed and betrayal. Poirot's gray cells wrestled with the initials JH, MC, CB. Each had a motive, but the hooded figure suggested a singular act, a moment of deadly precision. At the police station, Poirot reviewed the evidence with a weary sergeant. The syringe in Hart's bag held saline, a decoy, as Poirot suspected. The cigarette case in Margaret's possession was a gift, its residue tobacco, not poison. Vincent's maintenance log was routine, the oil smudge common to his work. But Clara's cyanide receipt, matched to the poison's batch, was a thread that pulled tighter. Yet the ledger's plural, them, suggested collaboration. A conspiracy Poirot had not yet unraveled. He sought out a chemist who supplied Clara's photography materials, hoping to trace the cyanide's source. The chemist, a meticulous woman named Mrs. Adler, checked her records. Miss Beaumont's purchase was standard, she said. But I heard rumors. Someone else bought cyanide under a false name, through a medical supplier. Could be a doctor. Poirot's mind flashed to Hart, his access to medical channels a perfect conduit. But the ledger's initials linked them all, a tangle of motives that defied a single culprit. Back at the dock, Poirot questioned a ferry steward who had served the early run. Miss Vance was alone, the steward said, kept to herself, sipping from that fancy thermos. Didn't see anyone near her, but the fog was thick. The fog, Poirot mused, was the killer's ally, cloaking their movements. The hooded figure described by Callahan could be Hart, his coat tailored but concealable. Or was it a disguise, worn by another to deflect suspicion? Poirot's logic turned to the ledger's implications. If Eleanor had confronted her embezzlers, she had invited her own death. A moment of opportunity seized in the fog. He visited the Vance Shipping Company's offices, seeking more on the ledger's entries. Mr. Grayson, the manager, was reluctant but cooperative. Miss Eleanor was meticulous, he said. She noticed discrepancies months ago, started digging. Said she'd handle it herself. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And these initials, J.H., M.C., C.B., they were involved? Grayson nodded. Could be. She didn't trust anyone, not even her brother. Edward Vance, Poirot noted, was a shadow in the case, his affair with Clara a motive yet unexplored. As midnight approached, Poirot stood by the ferry, the harbor's waves whispering secrets. The ledger's truth was a fire, burning through the suspects' facades. Hart's knowledge, Margaret's ambition, Clara's desperation, Vincent's anger. Each was a spark, but which had ignited the murder? The thermos, the vial, the hooded figure, all pointed to a killer who planned meticulously, yet faltered in execution. Poirot adjusted his scarf, his resolve a beacon in the dark. The truth was near, but one clue remained elusive, a thread to tie the web together. The city's pulse quickened, its lights a challenge to the night. Poirot's mind was a storm of deductions, each clue a lightning strike. The ledger had named them all, but the hooded figure was the key. A figure seen but not known. A shadow in the fog. As he walked into the darkness, the ferry's horn wailed, a mournful echo of the question that drove him. Who had stood in the fog, pouring death into Eleanor's thermos? Chapter 9. The Final Confrontation. The twilight sky over New York Harbor burned with hues of amber and indigo. The Staten Island Ferry a dark silhouette against the fading light. Hercule Poirot stood on the upper deck where Eleanor Vance had met her end, the chill wind tugging at his tailored coat. The fog had lifted, leaving the city skyline sharp and unyielding, a mirror to the clarity he sought. The suspects, Dr. Julian Hart, Margaret Cole, Clara Beaumont, and Vincent Russo stood before him, wood scarred by time and the faint scratch he had noted. Let us begin with the evidence, he said, holding up the empty vial, its almond scent a ghost of the crime. This was found in Mademoiselle Vance's handbag, suggesting she carried her own poison. But Poirot, he does not believe in suicide for a woman so vibrant. The vial was placed to mislead, a clumsy act. Who then had access to her bag? His eyes lingered on Clara, whose hands trembled, and Vincent, whose jaw tightened. Poirot turned to the thermos, now in police custody but vivid in his mind. The silver thermos, engraved with the Vance crest, held the cyanide. It was Mademoiselle Vance's own, used daily. The poison was added before she boarded, or in a fleeting moment on this deck. Who knew her habits? Who could approach unseen? Margaret's lips parted as if to protest, but Poirot raised a gloved hand. "Patience, mademoiselle. All will be revealed." He produced the ledger, its leather cover worn but heavy with truth. "This ledger, found in Mademoiselle Vance's safe, reveals embezzlement. Funds siphoned from her company, marked with initials, JH, MC, CB. Each of you had motive, no? Dr. Hart, your disgrace by Cornelius Vance cost you your career. Mademoiselle Cole, your envy of Eleanor's success drove you to forgery. Mademoiselle Beaumont, your affair with Edward Vance threatened ruin. And, Monsieur Rousseau, your dismissal fueled a grudge that burned for years." Hart's face flushed, his cufflinks glinting as he clenched his fists. "I told you. I refused her request for help. I wasn't involved." Margaret's eyes flashed, her crimson hat tilting defiantly. "I competed with Eleanor, yes, but murder? Absurd." Clara's tears welled, her voice a whisper. "I loved her, Mr. Poirot. I couldn't." Vincent's scowl deepened, his voice gruff. "I hated the Vances, but I didn't touch her." Poirot's gaze sharpened, fierce. "But cyanide is not the tool of a deckhand, no." Vincent's fists clenched, his voice low. "I cleaned the deck, that's all. I didn't touch her bag." Poirot nodded, his gaze settling on Clara. "Mademoiselle Beaumont, your tears are moving, but your cyanide receipt, your midnight visit to the ferry, your letter from Eleanor, they point to a secret you could not bear. She knew of your affair with her brother, threatened to expose you. Did you silence her to save yourself?" Clara sobbed, her handkerchief pressed to her lips. "I begged her to understand. I didn't. I couldn't." Poirot's voice softened, but his eyes were relentless. "The ledger, mademoiselle, names you among the embezzlers. Did you betray her trust? Or was there another?" Poirot paced, his gray cells weaving the clues into a tapestry. The hooded figure, seen by a passenger, was near Mademoiselle Vance's bench before her death. A man, they said, but the fog obscured the truth. The thermos required access, the cyanide required knowledge, the vial required carelessness. "Let us test the logic, we?" He stopped before Hart. "Your syringe was a false clue, but your argument with Eleanor suggests you knew her plans. Did you supply the poison?" He turned to Margaret. "Your forgery shows cunning, but your absence from the gala places you near the crime. Did you slip the cyanide into her thermos, driven by envy?" To Vincent, "Your grudge is raw, but your actions lack the precision of this murder. Were you a distraction, or more?" And to Clara, "Your receipt matches the poison's batch. Your letter reveals a motive. Did you pour death into her tea, mademoiselle?" The suspect stood silent, the deck creaking beneath them. Poirot's voice rose, a crescendo of deduction. "The ledger names you all, but only one hand held the poison. Mademoiselle Beaumont, your tears are real, but they follow guilt. The cyanide came from your dark room. The thermos was tampered with during your midnight visit. Eleanor's letter threatened your future, and your shadow remains. Who else stood in the fog?" The police, waiting nearby, stepped forward, their boots heavy on the deck. Clara's confession was a thread unraveled, but Poirot's gray cells sensed a deeper knot. The ledger's initials, the hooded figure, the plural them in Eleanor's diary, all hinted at a second hand. Had Clara acted alone, or was another complicit? The ferry's horn wailed, a mournful echo of the unresolved, as Poirot adjusted his hat, his mind racing toward the final truth. The suspect stood, their fates hanging in the balance. Clara's tears flowed freely, her confession a weight lifted but a chain forged. Poirot's logic was a beacon, but the ledger's secrets suggested more. A partner, a planner, a shadow in the fog. As the police led Clara away, Poirot's eyes lingered on the others, each a piece in the puzzle. The thermos, the vial, the ledger, all were clear. But one question burned, sharp as the harbor's wind. Was Clara's confession the whole truth? Or did another hand guide the poison's path? Chapter 10. The Sinister Secret Revealed. The Staten Island Ferry lay anchored at the Manhattan dock, its silhouette a somber sentinel against the night sky of 1932 New York. The stars above glittered coldly, their light reflected in the restless waters of the harbor, as Hercule Poirot stood once more on the upper deck, where Eleanor Vance had met her tragic end. The air was crisp, carrying the tang of salt and the faint echo of the city's pulse, horns, shouts, the distant wail of a saxophone. The suspects, Dr. Julian Hart, Margaret Cole, Vincent Russo, and the now confessed Clara Beaumont, stood before him, their faces a gallery of shock, relief, and lingering unease. Clara's tearful admission had unraveled one thread of the mystery. But Poirot's gray cells, those relentless engines of logic, sensed a deeper truth, a shadow yet to be dispelled. The ledger, the thermos, the vial, the hooded figure, all pointed to a conspiracy that Clara's confession only oil smudge, now mere echoes of the crime. "Let us reconstruct the final moments," he said, his eyes gleaming. Mademoiselle Vance, alone with her thermos, sipped tea laced with cyanide. A hooded figure, seen by a passenger, lingered nearby. Clara, you have confessed, but the ledger's plural, them, suggests a partner. Poirot held up the ledger, its leather cover catching the deck's lantern light. This book reveals theft from the Vance Shipping Company. Mademoiselle Vance discovered it, planned to confront those responsible on this ferry at 4 a.m. Clara, your affair with Edward Vance was a secret she threatened to expose, but the ledger points to a greater crime: financial betrayal. Who else stood to lose if Eleanor spoke? His gaze swept over the suspects, each a piece in the puzzle. He turned to Dr. Hart, whose pale face betrayed his nerves. Monsieur Hart, your disgrace by Cornelius Vance was a wound that never healed. The ledger's initials, J.H., suggest you siphoned funds, perhaps to rebuild your life. You visited Mademoiselle Vance's penthouse, argued with her. Did you supply the cyanide, knowing Clara's desperation? Hart's voice cracked. I stole nothing. My argument was about her mother's death, not money. But his trembling hands told another story, and Poirot's gray cells noted the lie. To Margaret. Mademoiselle Cole, your envy drove you to forge a letter, undermining Eleanor's contract. The ledger's MC points to your involvement in the theft. Your absence from the gala, your presence at the docks. Did you conspire to silence her? Margaret's eyes flashed. I fought her in business, not with poison. The ledger's wrong. Yet her defiance wavered, her fingers clutching her pearls. To Vincent. Monsieur Russo, your grudge against the Vances burned hot, but the ledger does not name you. Your oil smudge, your maintenance log. They place you near the crime. Medical channels. Your visit to the penthouse. You provided the poison, knowing Clara's desperation. The syringe, filled with saline, was your decoy. But the vial in Eleanor's bag was your mistake. The crowd gasped, the police officers tightening their grip on Clara. Poirot continued, his voice a crescendo. The ledger reveals your theft, Dr. Hart. You and Clara, bound by greed and fear, conspired. Clara tampered with the thermos during her midnight visit. But you, monsieur, stood watch in the fog, ensuring no one interfered. The vial, you placed it to suggest suicide, but it betrayed your hand. Together, you silenced Mademoiselle Vance, whose discovery of your embezzlement threatened ruin. Clara's tears stopped, her face pale as she stared at Hart. Julian, you said it would only make her ill, she whispered. Hart's composure shattered, his voice a desperate plea. I didn't mean for her to die. I gave Clara the cyanide, yes, but I thought it would just delay her. Poirot's eyes softened, but his tone was firm. Intent matters little when death is the result. You both betrayed Mademoiselle Vance. Clara for love, Hart for greed. Margaret and Vincent stood silent, their roles clarified. Margaret's forgery was a crime, but not murder. Vincent's grudge was raw, but impotent. The ledger's initials had implicated them, but Poirot's logic cleared their names. The thermos, tampered by Clara. The cyanide supplied by Hart. The vial placed by his hand. All formed the tapestry of murder. The hooded figure, Hart in his tailored coat, had sealed Eleanor's fate in the fog. Poirot turned to the police, his voice calm but commanding. Mes amis, take Dr. Hart and Mademoiselle Beaumont into custody. Their confessions confirm their guilt. The officers nodded, leading the pair away. Clara's sobs mingling with Hart's protest. Sinister secret, he murmured, is no more. Hercule Poirot has brought order to chaos. The ferry's horn wailed, a final note in the symphony of justice as he descended to the dock, his steps light with satisfaction. The truth had been found, the killers unmasked, and the harbor's waves carried their guilt into the night. But as he walked into the city's embrace, a faint question lingered, a whisper in the wind. Had every shadow been dispelled? Or did the ledger hold one final secret?